Blog Talk Radio. Hello, and welcome to PS10 Radio. This is Parent to Parent Sunday, and I am your host, Angelon. I'm excited today because we have a special guest, Maria Davis here, and she is the founder and CEO of Autism in Black Incorporated that is located in West Palm Beach, Florida. She is also a mother of daughter with autism, so she's very much in tune to this topic, and she knows all about different things and different ways to address and just talk about autism in the Black community. Welcome, Maria.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited. Just for listeners out there that aren't aware, I have loved ones in my family, including my own son, but also other loved ones in my family who do have autism. And I just wanted to know, Maria, can you explain to us what autism spectrum disorders are?
Yes. So autism spectrum disorder is an actual neurological disorder that is characterized by issues with communication, sensory, and social interactions. So you may see a person who is autistic and they may not know how to carry on a conversation back and forth. They may not have eye contact. They may have limited speech or be nonverbal. Certain sounds, smells, light issues like that may bother them. So those are some of the characteristics of autism, but also know that autism is a spectrum disorder, so every individual who is autistic is completely different.
Okay, yeah. And I know when you and I spoke earlier, we just spoke about the fact that there's, on the low end, there's the nonverbal and the ones that have very high sensory needs. And then we also talked about the Asperger's, or the higher functioning autism. So can you differentiate between that?
Sure. So, like I said, autism falls on a spectrum. So, every individual has different characteristics. So professionals may use the terms lower functioning or higher functioning when talking about someone who is autistic. And on the lower end, you may have somebody who needs more support, more care from a caregiver. So they may be completely nonverbal. They may not be able to do their independent living skills and take care of themselves, advocate for themselves. They may have certain behaviors, things like that. And then there's people who may be on the higher functioning scale who, can have a conversation. They can be verbal, but they still have problems with social interaction and sensory needs, And then there are individuals who are actually, may be nonverbal, but considered higher functioning as well. So, that's why, they've changed it from those three categories that it used to be, which is Asperger's, autism, and PDD, to now an actual spectrum disorder, because, you can fall anywhere and have some of the, the same characteristics of somebody else who's on the lower end, but you can be higher end and still be nonverbal. So.
Right. Yeah, that is so true. I just wondered a little bit about when you have when I initially thought of autism disorders, spectrum disorders, I sometimes think of, and just from, like I said, just noticing my loved ones, that it's like egocentric, like it's all about them, and they're kind of in their own world, right?
Yes, for some children, they can be kind of, to themselves, doing their own thing. They don't really care if they're, around other people or having the interactions of other people. They're doing their own thing. But for instance, my daughter, she is very social. She's very wanting to give hugs and be on the people that she, knows. Not strangers, but people that she knows.
Right.
So, for some people, but she still has moments to where she can not really notice what's going on around her. So she can be doing her own thing and not notice what is going on around her at school or at home and things like that.
And I think that's what the amazing thing is about this, like you said, this broad spectrum. Even though they did take the Asperger's and PDV distinction off, I do still see people still try to use those terms just because the spectrum is so broad. And like you said, like people who are older, teenagers and beyond, they could still be nonverbal and still have some setbacks. And where, the lower functioning, if they're caught early, they could make some gains and actually improve their status. It may not be at the same as a higher functioning, but it's just very interesting, the spectrum itself.
Yes, most definitely. And then, for the parents, who are, who have children who are autistic and having to kind of navigate, the different periods, because, someone who is 5 and then gets through puberty and then, young adulthood, it's so different at each of those points. So having to navigate each of those, life transitions for the parent, is also something that they're constantly learning as well.
So how do you think that how do you think this specifically affects, like, those in the Black community? Do you see that there is a increase in diagnoses for autism in the Black community, or do you think that we're just still behind the 8 ball on that?
I think that we are getting better at diagnosing in the Black community. I still think, there's huge gains that we do need to make. I mean, overall we're still 2 years behind. Looking at, diagnosis between white children and Black children. That's the overall diagnosis. When we break it down by state, it could be 8 years behind, between a white child and a Black child. Yeah, so we're just talking about overall there's a 2-year gap between, white children getting diagnosed and Black children getting diagnosed. And while we have, made improvements on closing that gap, we still have a long way to go. But I think, we are getting more awareness into the Black communities. There's a lot of cultural issues that go into us not, getting the diagnosis or getting the diagnosis delayed. And I think that by, having the awareness and breaking some of those stigmas and barriers down, it's helping, those who are autistic get their diagnosis and get, the services that they need.
And can you share with us, like, what the cultural biases are, for people who are not aware of it, maybe because they're not Black, or even people who are Black who are kind of oblivious to the fact that they're doing some of the things that cause the stigma?
Yes. So within the Black community, the stigmas, some of the stigmas would be, one, religion. And while I am speaking, on generalities, it's, I know some people do not, believe in religion or things like that, but we're talking about overall in the Black community, religion is kind of a staple point, a focal point, and that can actually, interfere with a child getting the diagnosis because, culturally we've been taught to pray about it, go to the altar, talk to the pastor. We don't tell anybody our business. We don't talk about family business. So we take it to God, and, heal, he's the healer of all things. So you take it there rather than going to a doctor and telling them that, your child is having some developmental delays. You take it to God,
right.
Then there's a lot of shame and guilt around, your child being different, in the Black community, because we have to deal with so much things as, being Black, then adding on a diagnosis and adding another focal point to your kid, that is something that a lot of parents don't want to do, so they rather just not get a diagnosis because they don't want a label,
Right.
So dealing with that, dealing with
oh, go ahead.
I would say dealing with family pressures, the boundary issues. For a lot of us, other family members watch our children. So, if, the grandparent or whoever's watching your child sees that there is a delay, they're more likely to say, just give the baby time to catch up, stop, trying to make the child do this, give them their own time. In their own time, they'll do stuff. And that also leads to, a gap. So those are, within our culture. Then outside of the culture, there's, healthcare professionals not believing that Black children can be autistic. There's healthcare professionals who don't want to have conversations with Black moms because they don't think they're going to understand what autism is, and they rather not start the conversation because they don't want to get behind in all those appointments they have. Then, healthcare professionals are not trained in autism. Your regular pediatrician is not trained in autism, so they don't, always know what it looks like. So, they may be dropping the ball on that end because they're not seeing it. So there's a lot of things that, deal with us having that 2-year overall gap.
Right, and then too, just speaking on the things that you just brought up there, like from the latter part, what I noticed, and I told you earlier, I just noticed when you you go to a doctor's appointment, their back is to you because they're typing on the computer, and they really are only seeing you for like 5 or 10 minutes, and you spend more time with the nurses and than with them, yet sometimes they are looked at as to, supposed to be making the referrals or whatever to get the evaluations. But like you said, if their focus is on, let me just get this patient out of here, they're not noticing the things that would be necessary to make that referral for an evaluation.
Exactly.
And then too, what I wanted to share was just the fact that, and I had an experience when I was a teenager. I had a friend, and her she had an uncle who the family kind of kept out of sight, and I hardly ever saw him except if I went over her relatives' homes. But I feel like that has to do back with that cultural bias of the shame, and just we'll take care of it in-house so that they don't need that professional intervention and need people to come out to your home and get in your business. Because, Black people tend to, that's our business. What happens in the home stays in the home. We don't talk about it outside of here.
Yes, most definitely. And also, a form of protection and protecting them from the outsiders. And, are they going to take my kid away, and this, that, and the other? So they rather, just take care of it in home rather than, inviting professionals in to, provide assistance.
And I do understand it can be scary because not really jumping ahead, but just the fact that, I hear of like ABA services, and a lot of those things are done in the home. And so that would require for you to be open to that intervention.
Yes, a lot of those services are done in home. And for us in the Black community, we don't tend to care for outsiders in our home, and then when I tell professionals that there is a culture, to going in a Black person's house that you need to be aware of, because, otherwise you won't be welcome back. So, you have to be aware of, the culture of the home when you're going in, because a lot of the services, are provided in home for the child.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, would you say, you know, as us talking about intervention, I kind of want to go back to sensory and the sensory things that may occur that we could keep an eye out for, and then what would be the strategies for those sensory needs?
Mhm. So a lot of times when people see autistic children having sensory overload, they think they're having a tantrum, but in fact it's sensory overload. People who are autistic kind of have senses that are 10 times magnified than, me and you. So they're feeling smells 10 times magnified, sounds 10 times magnified, light 10 times magnified. And if they're going to some place like the mall and there's a lot of sound, there's a lot of smells, and there's a lot of light and, different types of light, that can be overwhelming for them. And they, are trying to cope with all of that. So, they probably are going to melt down because it's so much that they're experiencing, because of that. For instance, my daughter, when we go into loud places, she wears headphones. She wears headphones that can kind of muffle out the sound. There's a lot of prepping because of transitions. Children who or people who are autistic, they don't deal with transitions that well. They like routine. They like to know what's coming next. So you can't just be like, okay, we're going to, change up your routine and we're going to do something, different today. You prepare them and let them know, so there's, that way. And those are things that the parent can do. Then, of course, there are different types of therapies that, your child can be in to help them gain the coping skills for themselves to be able to know, okay, this is what I need to do in these types of situations.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I just feel like sometimes it's the sensory things that, we kind of, like you said, we have a little bit of control over because we can do the things like put on headphones, or we can dim the lights, or, we can provide them with a pillow or a special blanket, or I know for my son, he had like certain fabrics on his skin he just could not tolerate, And even like food, certain food textures, can't tolerate certain food textures, just prefers a certain way a food looks and tastes. Otherwise, he just will not eat it. So those things are they're very real, and it's not a discipline thing, or you didn't give them enough different foods when they were little or anything like that. Like, that's a part of them, and it's who they are.
Yeah, and it's my daughter, for instance, likes just jelly sandwiches. She eats fruit, jelly sandwiches, cereal, and chips. About the when it comes to her diet, that's what it is. And, most people are like, oh, you put something in front of her and she'll eventually eat it. No, they won't.
No, they will hold out, won't they? They will hold out. I'll be like, you ain't nothing all day. Let me give you your jelly sandwich. Because we ain't going to eat nothing else. I've had teachers.
That's her diet. Do it.
Exactly. And I've had teachers email me and say, I notice all he's eating is chips and peanut butter wafers. And I'm like, look, he eating. And that's what he likes to eat for lunch. And when he comes home for dinner, he has his rice and his white noodles and, all that kind of stuff. But they just don't understand. They look at it as something else. But poor parenting. And even like that may be. Go ahead.
I was saying that, even with the clothing issue, you can see different companies now starting to cater to those who have sensory issues, and they're doing tagless. I know Target has, different clothing now that is tagless and making sure that, it's easier to put on and that.
Right.
So thank you to those companies for making it easier for us.
Yes, thank you. And I found those early. I've even heard of compression T-shirts. just to apply that
yes.
heat pressure they need under their clothing, because I know at one point my son asked for a weighted vest, and so he was given a weighted vest by his father, and he wanted to wear that everywhere, and I was like, that's just not appropriate to wear on top of your clothes. It's just, but, I mean, that's what he wanted, and he knew that that's what he needed, and I thought that was really good insight for him.
Yeah,
so
and, those weighted blankets, yes. We have a weighted blanket. There's, like, weighted stuffed animals, things like that. So, yeah, we have all of that, but, it's good that he knew he needed that.
Right, and it's probably something he got off of YouTube. I don't know. He just knew. He knew I need some. I need some weight. But so I mean, I just think it's huge, the sensory needs. But what I do like you said, is that parents can, if you're aware of it, we can do something to address it. Until we're able to get them to the OT or PT or whatever they need for intervention.
Yeah, most definitely. And even then, when they do go to, the healthcare professionals, I still like to tell parents, your child, you're the expert in your child. They're the expert in their craft in their field, but they don't know your kid like you do. So make sure that you are advocating for your kid and letting them know that, hey, this may not work, but this may, so let's try something different. Or the intervention that you gave us last week isn't really working. Can we try something different, So make sure that you're constantly advocating for your child, even when you're dealing with professionals.
Yes, because parents are the best and number one advocate for their children, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
We know them best. I will say because I do work in the schools, and I have over the years had ASD students here and there in my caseload. I remember a few years back I had maybe a 7th grader, I think he was, and he was having a lot of issues, behavior issues at the school, and we kind of were dealing with it as if we were dealing with an emotionally impaired student. Until Mother shared with us that he did have an ASD diagnosis. And we were like, oh, well, this because you deal with them different than you would a child with behavior issues. And once she shared with us some of his sensory things, which included brushing, so she brought in a brush, and this was new for us. So we were like, okay, you're bringing in a brush. And she told us he knows what to do with it. And he would sit on a beanbag and just brush his arms. And, and it was amazing to see him calm himself. And another tool he used was he liked to rub his mother's hair. And in order for her to get away with that, she had to buy him like a wig that she, can allow for him to, this is like my hair, and so he would pull that out of his backpack when he needed it, and he would be, stroking his hair in the corner in the bean bag. I mean, it's amazing because your child, you know what they need. And once you figure it out, how to address it, I mean, it can help with their coping skills.
Yes, be so helpful, and always let the school know, have that communication. Them. A lot of times, we don't want to share, again, our personal business, but it is for the protection of your child, because if you're letting them know that, your child has a diagnosis like autism or ADHD or any of those other, diagnoses, then the school can then provide you with, an IEP that can protect your child, because a lot of times some children who are autistic do have behavior issues. And then, once their behavior issues are occurring, they start to look at your child differently, like, oh, you're a problem person. However, if you let them know that the behaviors are due to their diagnosis, then your child gets protected, by the law. And, they're not going to be able to be just, kicked out of school or, sent to in-school suspension and things like that.
Yes, because their behaviors will be addressed differently. And like I said, with me working in the schools, I have seen this firsthand. Like I said, we changed the way we dealt with his tantrums. We were pulling out his sensory tools instead of calling security. So that made a huge difference. Can you share with us just how can you share with us just how we can support people, families who have a loved one with ASD in our community, in the Black community?
Yes, most definitely. I will share what my personal triggers are as a parent who has an autistic child. So one thing is you're sharing that you want to fix my child. My child is not broken. She doesn't need to be fixed.
Right.
So watch your terminology. Understand that with us having a child who is autistic, we're already dealing with coming to terms with their diagnosis or coming to terms with things that we had not initially planned. So you coming in with opinions and suggestions and overloading us with information, making us second-guess things, that is very stressful for a parent and overwhelming for a parent. And if you are a family friend or, a family member, sometimes it's hard for us to set those boundaries with you. So instead of us, being forthright and letting you know, hey, that's bothering us, we will just hold it in internally, and it stresses us out. So be mindful of that. A lot of times we don't want you to try to come in and with opinions or try this and do this. We want you to listen, or, give us some support where we can go and take a night off and go do something, because the amount of people we trust with our children, exactly, the amount of people we trust with our children is pretty limited. We don't want anybody to come in and mess up the progress that we've already made, so understand that. Right. And if we've said this is what needs to be done and you're offering to help, do what we said and not do something different that you've read on the internet that you think is going to work. Do what we've asked you to do. So provide that support in that way. So I think that's just, how you can be supportive to a family and don't make them feel like, they're different or, shame and guilt. No, they're still a part of your family. Their child is autistic. That's, the end of it, so there's no need to treat anybody differently. Right.
Don't treat our children different. Yes, love that. And I think it just takes for people to have some empathy, too, for the parents, because the parents have, multiple appointments. You always have therapies to go to, doctor appointments, sometimes medications you have to distribute. And on top of that, the professionals don't do everything. We as parents have to, like you said, we have a routine we made up. We have, these expectations we have. We have to say things in a certain way to our children and teach them certain things. So we're also a part of that team to train our children. And I think if you're going to, if in the Black community, if our loved ones or people who are around us are not supporting us in that way, then they are becoming part of the problem, kind of interfering with any progress.
Exactly. And it can be isolating and you taking yourself away from those who don't understand. And, especially knowing that, there's probably, like for me and my husband, if we're looking at our circle of friends, we're the only one who has a child with special needs. So even though our friends are empathetic and sympathetic, they don't get what, we are going through in a sense. They don't understand our daily routines and, things that we have to do, for her. So just knowing that, if you do have a friend who is a caregiver to their child who has special needs or disability, be aware of, the things you say and the things you do. Know that, we're not going to be able to just, go on a trip with you somewhere. That's not possible for hey, if you just discipline them this way, then things will work. No, you cannot beat autism out of a kid. So
No,
let's just,
yeah.
quit
And I
saying
think,
that and quit going
right.
there.
Yep, and I think that's, I found that a lot too as my son was growing up, when you're not being a strong enough disciplinarian, or you must be really light on him. And I actually was not. I mean, I had expectations for him just as I would any other child, but, I think that's the assumption in the Black community, like, oh, do you need to, be harder on them, or, you're being too lenient, or you don't have no rules over there, or they think that's why the kids are freaking out or not comfortable around them, or whatever the situation is. But it's really the child they know what's familiar to them and what makes them comfortable, and then you see your routine. And when someone new comes around, or they're in a new experience, it looks like they're undisciplined.
And then, they just have to understand it, and understand that we don't always want to explain everything, to you. We do get tired of having to teach everybody. I'm the number one autism advocate for Black families, in my work. But in my personal life, I don't always want to have to explain. That gets tiring.
Right.
So, understand that there's just sometimes I just don't want to explain to you A, B, and C. I just don't. Google is your friend. Use it.
Right. You look that up.
Yes. Use it. Don't question everything that I'm doing. I know what I need to do for my child.
Exactly.
So those
and
things
I see the differences.
Difficult.
Yes, and I see the differences, especially between like someone who, like a family member that I may not be around on a regular basis, versus a family member or one of my close friends, like my best friends who know my son a lot more. Then I can see that they know exactly what I'm talking about, versus the person that's, we see every once and again, and they have no idea what, we're dealing with on a daily basis. So.
Exactly. And for my autism parents and caregivers, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to set boundaries with your family and friends, Don't be afraid to have self-care. I know a lot of times that, we're so focused on our actual, child who is autistic that a lot of times we forget about ourselves. But, if you're not taking care of yourself at 100%, you cannot take care of your kid at 100%. So make sure you're taking time out for self-care. Make sure you're setting boundaries with people and telling them no, and not overextending yourself. Take care of you and trust your instinct. I tell my parents all the time, I call all my parents the team captain. You are the team captain, and everybody on your team should be playing together, and if they are not, then you fire them. It is okay to fire them, especially for my Black parents, because we are taught not to, question someone who's went to school. They may be a doctor and this, that they are the professional. No, they can be wrong. You can fire them, and you can get somebody else. I fired plenty of people, and I don't feel bad for it. Okay, so
I have as well.
Yes. Because if you get a team that is all playing together for your child, it makes it easier for your child.
Yeah, you will see some progress, too. When you don't have the right team, things can go left real fast. So
yes, and then you're feeling anxious and don't know what's going on. No, you're the leader. You're the captain of the ship. You're the team captain. So make sure everybody is playing accordingly.
Yes, that is excellent. Excellent advice. I love that. I really want people to just remember those three things that you just said, just not being afraid to say no and use boundaries, and then don't be afraid of practicing self-care, and don't be afraid to trust your instincts. Those are really key things, really key. Because I do think along the way, when you're dealing with a special needs child, you tend to get so caught up in what's going on with your child and you're doing all this research into like interventions and just things about the disability, or sometimes on the other end you're trying to avoid, all of the responsibility, because it's a lot you have to do when you have a special needs child. It's always an appointment or something you got to do, and some people choose to just kind of avoid it or ignore it, and so it's important to really just, realize, just take a deep breath and, create your boundary and educate yourself as a parent.
Yes, because you are, your child's advocate, until they're able to advocate for themselves. So it's up to you to make sure, that they're getting what they need. You have to be advocating, in the schools. I cannot stress enough that you need to be physically present in these IEP meetings and not by phone or not going at all, because the IEP, for those who don't know, the Individualized Education Plan is a kind of a goal plan that your child gets yearly when they have a diagnosis like autism, or ADHD and things like that. They get this IEP. It's done every year. And once you sign it, you've signed it and you've agreed to what's in there. And if you don't know what you're signing, you don't know what you're agreeing to for your child. So you need to be making sure that you educate yourself on the law. There's a whole
and it's
law,
a legal
the
document.
IDEA law. Exactly. There's a whole law that protects your child, in the school system, the IDEA law. I can't stress enough that you need to know the basics of that. You need to know what goals and accommodations and modifications that the school is providing and setting up for your child, because the point is for your child to be successful in school, and the point of the IEP is to help them be successful. But if you aren't educating yourself and knowing what's going on in your child's IEP, the schools can take advantage of that and not provide your child with, as much speech therapy as they may need, or OT, or making sure they get the accommodations and modifications they need, because in the end they're saving money and they're not having to provide those things. So you have to make sure your child is getting what they need.
Right, and you want to make sure they have the right program. And even, as I said, I work in the schools. I've noticed lately a couple of students who they actually weren't diagnosed yet, like you said, and one in particular I'm thinking of was actually a Hispanic child, and he has spent the past 2 years in a regular kindergarten room, never spoke a word in the whole 2 years. And but ironically, he has learned to model, mimic his peers. So he's able to follow routines and everything, just smiles or, looks sad or whatever. He has all the emotional faces, but, just the sad and happy, really, and just depending on what's going on. But he's just getting along. And so part of his programming, once he was determined to have ASD, was to allow him to still mainstream. However, he would go into the autism program classroom certain times of the day so he can learn his number, his letters, because those are the things he hasn't been able to make any progress on. But he's progressed, and he can mimic his peers socially. Like he'll sit down when they sit down. He'll go to his desk when they go to their desk. He'll dance around the music when the music is on. But he don't talk, and he doesn't know letters and numbers, and So it's really amazing
and being inclusive is so important, and you need to make sure that the schools are making sure they're being inclusive for your child, and not making your child, just be with the ASD community. No, they do need to be mainstream and with, general education and things like that, because, out in real life, they're not just going to be with an ASD community, Exactly. So inclusivity is so important. You need to make sure, that the school knows what it means by being inclusive, because a lot of schools will say, oh, your child is participating in being inclusive at lunch, and what it really is they're at a table, with other ASD kids,
away.
but, the rest
right.
of exactly, away, but,
mm-hmm.
everybody else is doing their own lunch thing. That's not inclusive. No, they need to be at the table with
and
the general education
it's not being facilitated
students.
either.
No,
right, it's not being facilitated.
So
they're just sitting at the table. and that's what I mean by programming, and not necessarily being in a self-contained classroom, but maybe that student's program is to be inclusion with the gen ed population, but have, an hour with the self-contained teacher, or maybe it is to be self-contained and then worked out an hour into the gen ed population. Like it can go so many different ways, but again, it goes back to the parent is the advocate. You know what your child needs. If you don't see any progress, try a different route. Speak up for yourself and for your child until they are able to.
Yeah, most definitely. And if you see that a goal is not working on your child's IEP, it should not roll over onto the next one. Like, the goal needs to be scrapped.
Right.
And you guys need to, start over again. There should be no goals rolling over because of no progress.
Right.
Because that means the goal's not working for the child.
It needs to be tweaked in some way, even if it's, even if it has to be reduced. Instead of expecting a child to do 80%, can we get it to, can we see if the child can work a little smaller increments? Break it down a little more, so they can feel some form of success, and the parent can feel success. Like, oh, they actually met this goal. So
exactly.
I know we talked earlier about. So we talked earlier about some interventions when you and I spoke, and so can you tell people what ABA is?
Yeah, so while I am not a ABA therapist, I am a licensed mental health counselor. ABA is applied behavioral analysis, and there are different tiers of somebody who is an ABA therapist. Mostly what parents have, coming into their homes are actually RBTs and not the actual BCBAs, which would be the licensed ABA therapist. They have the registered behavior technician that is covered under the BCBA that is coming into their home. And, what they're basically working on is applying, techniques to deal with certain behaviors that your child may be exhibiting, so to change those behaviors into being something more productive or different for the child.
Okay. Now, what do you know about? Oh, go ahead.
No problem. I wanted to say, when a child gets diagnosed with autism, most people just automatically think ABA, and not every child needs ABA therapy. And I think it's important to know there's other therapies, out there that your child can benefit from, going to see a licensed mental health counselor, who is an autism specialist, that your child, just because your child is autistic does not mean they need ABA therapy, but, your child may be autistic and actually do need ABA therapy. So, there's two ends to it. For instance, my daughter doesn't have any behaviors, that need to be addressed in ABA therapy. So she doesn't have ABA therapy. We're not against ABA therapy. We're just not going to put her in something that she doesn't need,
Exactly.
So be mindful of if your child actually needs ABA therapy, and know that there's other therapies out there, OT, occupational therapy, PT, physical therapy, speech. So there's a long list of therapies that your child can be put in for specific things, but do they need all of them? Maybe not.
No.
So make sure your child is getting things that they need, and not just because they're, having a diagnosis that they need to be just placed in all of these services, because, sometimes that does more harm than good.
Right, and it's overload for the child because, like I said, when you have a child with special needs, you have to go to all these appointments, and if you got all these therapies going on, I mean, that could be overload for you, for the child, it's a lot. Yeah,
it is. And make sure you, the parent, also know that there's therapies out there for yourself as well, because being a caregiver, is,
Mhm.
something different, and it's difficult, and there's a lot of emotions that go into it as well. So just like you
Right.
advocate for your child, you need to advocate for yourself as well.
Mhm. Right. Oh, that's excellent. What about social skills groups? Have you ever tried that for your daughter, or do you know a lot about that? Or
Yes, I actually think social skills groups are very helpful, for your child if they are, struggling with that social aspect. My
Mhm.
daughter was she started off at an exclusive school, so everybody there was autistic. So she
Mhm.
participated a lot in, different social skills groups. She's now mainstreamed to a Gen Ed population. So, with her, she's getting speech and things like that
Oh, great.
to
Yeah.
help with the social skills aspect of it. But, yeah, I think that if your child, because the point of it is to help your child be able to, live independently if, they're able to, they
Mhm.
do need certain skills to be able to navigate the world and, having that social skills aspect, knowing how to appropriately respond in conversations and do interviews and things like that. Those are skills that they do need. So if you can find the right, type of interventions for your child, do so and know that, because there can be a lot of controversy around ABA and certain therapies.
Right.
And I think people have to understand that, there are bad therapists. There's
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
bad therapists in every part of the field. I've
In
met a lot of
every
them.
field,
I
right?
got rid, I
Yeah,
got rid of a lot of them.
right, right, exactly.
So
We know a
don't let
few,
that
right?
taint your view. Yeah, don't let that
Yeah.
taint your view, because there are also excellent therapists. There are great
Right.
ABA therapists and there are horrible ABA therapists. There are great,
Okay. Yeah.
licensed mental health counselors and there's horrible ones, So understand
Mhm.
that don't let one bad apple spoil the bunch, So, try
Exactly.
what works for your kid and don't go off
Right.
the opinions of others. You know what works for your child.
Right. Yeah. Well, Maria, I just love that we were able to connect and talk about all of these things. And I just want to recap some of the things that you said. I like to take notes like I'm in school when I'm interviewing you ladies. And so what I really appreciated you started out saying is early intervention matters. You also shared that, to make your concerns aware to your medical provider if you suspect that your child may have a disability or be behind developmentally, such as ASD. Also, parents know their children best, so it's best that we kind of prepare them for transitions, kind of figure out what their sensory needs are, and try to see if we can help them cope and meet their needs. And also, just as in the Black community, we need to stomp out this cultural stigma of keep it in-house, keep it in the family, the shame, hiding our children trying to hide their disabilities within the Black community, and be open to some interventions by professionals and others and help from each other. Because I'm sure there are other people, other Black people, maybe even in our community, our family, who are experiencing the same thing. We need to be sharing more and not be so guarded all of the time. And I love when you broke down 3, but I added the 4, but it's kind of, you were talking about don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to practice self-care. Don't be afraid to trust your own instincts. As you said, if there's a poor a clinician or therapist or therapy, go to another one, do a different one, and advocate for yourself so that you can take care of yourself, because you're the team captain and you're your child's biggest advocate. And that's what I got.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that I missed that you want to just touch base on before we wrap up here?
No, I think that, encapsulated everything. I just like to always end with that, self-care is self-love. So remember that. And always remember you are the team captain and it's okay to fire people who are not team players. I can't stress that enough.
Yes, yes. I totally agree. Thank you so much, Maria, for coming on. And I'm because I'm passionate about just educating other parents, because, parenting doesn't come with a handbook. And, there are a lot of self-help books out there, like you said, with therapists and with interventions. Some are good, some are bad, some are irrelevant. And it's just nice to get insight from somebody who is in the field and who knows what, is the issues are and how to address them. So I appreciate your time and coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so, did you want to plug any of your social media or your business?
Yes. If you are, interested in contacting and getting in touch with Autism in Black, which is my company, who provides support to Black parents who have a child who's on the spectrum, as well as training professionals on being more culturally competent with the Black disability community, you can go to www.autisminblack.org. You can also email me at info@autisminblack.org. Catch me on Instagram at autisminblack. I have a book called, oh my goodness, can't even remember my book name, Self-Care Affirmation Journal, which is on Amazon, or you can get it off my site. And I also have a IEP program for parents and professionals that you can get from me as well. So,
wonderful. Good information.
Hope to see you all on Instagram or any of my other social media channels, or email me or go to my website.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much, Maria. And to all the listeners out there, we just hope that you have a peaceful week, and stay tuned for PS10 Radio next Sunday at the same time. And as always, be the best parent that you can be, one positive step at a time. Peace.